Imani Robinson wiped the sweat from her forehead and glanced around the kitchen of her restaurant, Soul of the South. She had poured her heart and soul into this place for 25 years, creating one of the most successful African-American restaurants in Atlanta. But today, even her beloved work did not bring her the usual satisfaction. Something had broken inside her since her daughter Keisha introduced her to Leon. "Miss Robinson, table 7 is ready," her young assistant chef called out. Imani nodded, adjusting her perfectly styled short hair, and continued cutting sweet potatoes for the signature pie. Her thoughts returned to Leon Jackson, the husband of her only daughter. She couldn't explain why this man made her so deeply distrustful. Perhaps it was his overly bright smile, or the promises that seemed too good to be true. Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. "Keisha." Imani took off her gloves and answered, "Mom, Leon and I will be at your place in half an hour. He wants to discuss an idea for a new business." Imani suppressed a sigh. "Okay, honey, I'll be waiting for you at the office." Keisha Jackson, née Robinson, graduated from Emory University Law School with honors and quickly rose through the ranks at one of Atlanta's top law firms. Smart, ambitious, and beautiful, she had surpassed her mother, who had raised her alone after her father died of a heart attack when Keisha was only 12. Imani had always been proud of her daughter, but when Keisha brought Leon home 2 years ago, something inside her stirred. She smiled, of course, and hugged them both, but her mother's intuitions screamed danger. 40 minutes later, Imani sat in her small office in the back of the restaurant. She heard Keisha's familiar laughter and Leon's low voice long before they appeared in the doorway. "Mom!" Keisha hugged Imani. She smelled of expensive perfume and success. Leon followed her, dressed in an impeccable sand-colored linen suit, tall, with a perfectly trimmed beard and confident brown eyes. He looked exactly like the successful music producer he claimed to be. "Imani!" He nodded with the same self-assured smile that annoyed her so much and held out his hand. Imani shook it, not letting her disapproval show on her face. "Leon, how's it going at the studio?" "Couldn't be better." He glanced at Keisha. "But I'm here to talk about something else. I have a proposal that could benefit all of us." Imani pointed to the chairs, and they sat down. Leon began to explain his idea of creating a line of sauces and seasonings based on Imani's restaurant's signature recipes. He talked about distribution, marketing, profits. His words sounded smooth, but Imani sensed insincerity. "That sounds interesting," she said cautiously when he finished. "But my recipes are my family's legacy. I'm not sure I'm ready to put them on the mass market." Leon leaned forward. "Imani, you're thinking too small. These recipes could make you rich." "I'm already well off, Leon," she replied coldly. Keisha placed her hand on her mother's knee. "Mom, just think about it. Leon has connections in the industry that could take Soul of the South national." Imani looked at her daughter, noticing the sparkle in her eyes. Keisha truly believed in her husband. She didn't want to hurt her daughter, but she also couldn't just give away what she had built her entire life to a man she didn't trust. "I'll think about it," she finally said, knowing it was a lie. Leon flashed a smile, but his eyes remained cold. "That's all I'm asking." After the couple left, Imani returned to the kitchen with a heavy heart. Something about Leon Jackson bothered her. He had moved to Atlanta from Missouri about 3 years ago, but every time she asked him about his past, his answers were vague. For a music producer who supposedly worked with famous artists, there was surprisingly little information about him online. 2 weeks later, Imani woke up with a fever and feeling extremely tired. At first, she blamed it on overwork. She had been working longer hours than usual lately, trying to expand the restaurant's menu. But when night sweats and significant weight loss were added to the symptoms, she finally went to see a doctor. Dr. Zora Hampton greeted her in her office with a kind smile, but Imani immediately sensed that the news would not be good. "Miss Robinson, I have your test results," Dr. Hampton said gently but directly. "You have tested positive for HIV." Imani stared at the doctor, unable to comprehend what she had heard. "That's impossible," she whispered. I haven't had sex in over 5 years since my last partner died." Dr. Hampton looked at her with professional sympathy. HIV can manifest itself in different ways. Sometimes there are no symptoms for years. You may have had the infection longer than you think. But Imani knew that wasn't true. She had been tested regularly. Her last test, less than a year ago, had been negative. Something didn't add up. "I want to take another test," she said firmly. Dr. Hampton nodded. "Of course, we can do a repeat test today. In the meantime, let's discuss your treatment options." In the days that followed, Imani's world was turned upside down. The retest confirmed the diagnosis. She was prescribed antiretroviral therapy and given information about living with HIV, but one question kept nagging at her. How could she have gotten infected? Imani didn't tell Keisha about the diagnosis. She didn't want to worry her daughter until she had figured everything out herself. Instead, she began her own investigation, recalling every contact she had had over the past year. The only thing that stood out from the usual routine was an incident 2 months earlier, when Leon had come to the restaurant alone. He showed up late in the evening, shortly before closing time, claiming he wanted to mend their strained relationship. He brought expensive wine and insisted they drink it together. Imani remembered how he poured the wine, how he left briefly to go to the restroom, leaving her alone with the glasses. At the time, she thought he was just nervous. Dr. Hampton noticed a change in Imani's behavior during her next visit. "Is something bothering you besides your diagnosis?" she asked, as they discussed Imani's reaction to the medication. Imani hesitated. Her suspicions were wild, almost unbelievable. But what if, Dr. Hampton theoretically, is it possible to contract HIV through shared utensils? Or say, if someone added infected blood to your food or drink? The doctor sat up straight, her professional expression replaced by concern. "Miss Robinson, do you suspect that someone deliberately infected you?" Imani looked down at her hands. "I don't know. It sounds crazy, but I can't think of any other explanation." Dr. Hampton thought for a moment. Theoretically, yes, it's possible, although the likelihood of infection this way is low. HIV doesn't survive long outside the body, but if fresh infected blood gets into a wound or onto a mucous membrane, she fell silent. "Miss Robinson, if you truly believe you were the victim of deliberate infection, that is a criminal offense. You should contact the police." Imani shook her head. "I need proof. I can't make such accusations without it." She didn't mention that her prime suspect was her daughter's husband. If she was wrong, Keisha would never forgive her. Imani couldn't sleep that night. She decided she would talk to Leon alone in the morning. She would demand an explanation, but first she needed to find something to back up her suspicions. The next day, she called Leon and invited him to the restaurant after closing, saying she wanted to discuss his product line proposal. He agreed, surprising her with his willingness. Imani prepared for the meeting by hiding a voice recorder in her pocket and writing down everything she knew about her diagnosis, in case something happened to her. She put the letter addressed to Keisha in a safe. That evening, she sent the staff home early, saying she would close the restaurant herself. When the clock struck 9, she heard a knock on the back door. Leon entered the empty kitchen with the same confident smile. "Imani, I'm glad you changed your mind about my offer." She pointed to a chair at the cutting table. "I want to talk to you, Leon, but not about business." He sat down, still smiling, but now there was a look of caution in his eyes. "What is it, then?" Imani took a deep breath. "HIV." Leon's smile froze, then slowly faded. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Imani said quietly, turning on the voice recorder in her pocket. 2 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with HIV. This couldn't have happened naturally. Someone infected me on purpose. Leon stood up, his face suddenly hard. And you're accusing me? That's ridiculous, Imani. You've always looked for ways to turn Keisha against me. I didn't say it was you, she said, but I wonder why you'd think that. She saw him tense up, then forced himself to relax. It's an obvious conclusion considering you invited me here to discuss it. Imani moved closer. I did my own research, Leon. I found out some interesting things about you. For example, that you had a different life in Missouri and a different name. It was a bluff. She had no proof. But Leon's reaction told her everything. His eyes narrowed, his face darkened with anger. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, old woman. I know you infected me with HIV, Imani said, feeling her heart pound in her chest. What I don't know is why. What did I do to you? Leon laughed, a cold, ruthless laugh. You did nothing to me. You just got in my way, always looking down on me, thinking I wasn't good enough for your precious daughter. So this is revenge? Imani felt fear give way to anger. You risked my life because of your wounded ego? No, Leon said, moving closer. It's about the money, your restaurant, your recipes. Keisha is the sole heir, and I'm Keisha's husband. It's simple math. Imani realized she had made a terrible mistake inviting him here alone. Leon wasn't just a con man, he was a monster. Keisha will never believe you, she said, hoarsely backing away. She'll find out the truth. From whom? Leon snarled. From you? He moved toward her so quickly that she didn't have time to react. His hands closed around her throat. You've always been a problem, Imani, always standing between me and what I want. Imani struggled desperately, scratching his hands, trying to break free, but Leon was stronger. Darkness began to envelop her vision. The heavy pot hanging over the stove was the last thing she saw before everything went black. At 3 in the morning, Imani Robinson's body was discovered by a cleaning lady who had arrived a little earlier than usual. Imani was lying on the floor of her restaurant kitchen in a pool of blood with her head smashed in. The voice recorder in her pocket was crushed, as if someone had stepped on it. Detective Andre Baker arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the call. He examined the body, noted signs of a struggle, and then noticed a broken wine glass next to the victim. There was a lipstick mark on the rim of the glass. Detective Andre Baker methodically examined the kitchen of the Soul of the South restaurant. 20 years on the homicide squad had taught him that crime scenes tell stories to those who know how to listen. This story began with the body of the restaurant's 53-year-old owner, Imani Robinson, lying in a pool of dried blood. Time of death? He asked the medical examiner, crouching next to the body. Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, between 21 and 23 hours, the woman replied without looking up. The cause of death is believed to be traumatic brain injury. This, she pointed to a heavy cast-iron skillet with traces of blood, is probably the murder weapon. Baker nodded, making notes in his notebook. His attention was drawn to a broken wine glass near the victim's right hand. Check this glass for fingerprints and DNA, he said to the technician collecting evidence, and the wine residue, too. The detective glanced around the room. There were minimal signs of a struggle, an overturned chair, a broken glass. Either the attacker had taken the victim by surprise, or it was someone she knew and didn't fear. The safe in the office is open, reported a young patrolman who had looked into the kitchen. But we can't say if anything was stolen. Who found the body? The cleaning lady, Layla Davis. She came in early and found the back door unlocked. Baker made another note. I'll talk to her. Right now, I need to contact the victim's family. Notifying relatives of a death was the hardest part of his job, but Baker never passed it on to his subordinates. He found Imani's daughter's contact information on her phone and dialed the number. Keisha Jackson arrived 30 minutes later with her husband. Detective Baker watched them get out of an expensive black sedan. The woman moved as if in a trance, her face expressing shock and disbelief. The man, Leon Jackson, as he introduced himself, held his hand on her back, supporting her. His face was a mask of grief, but his eyes remained alert and assessing. "Mrs. Jackson," Baker greeted the victim's daughter quietly, "I'm very sorry for your loss." Keisha nodded, her eyes dry but full of pain. What happened?" "We're investigating a murder," the detective said bluntly. "Your mother was found early this morning in a restaurant. It may have been a robbery attempt that went wrong." "Robbery?" Keisha shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. The restaurant never kept much cash on hand. Mom always made the deposit at the end of the day." Leon squeezed his wife's shoulder. "Detective, when will we be able to see the body?" Baker looked closely at the man. Something about his behavior seemed off, too composed for someone whose mother-in-law had just been brutally murdered. "After the medical examiner finishes their work, I can contact you when the body is transferred to the morgue," he turned to Keisha. "Mrs. Jackson, I need to ask you a few questions. Did your mother have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted her dead?" Keisha shook her head slowly. "No, everyone loved Mom. She was the heart of the community." "What about her personal life? Was she seeing anyone?" "No, not in recent years. She had a relationship after my father died, but that was a long time ago." Baker made a note. "When was the last time you saw your mother?" 3 days ago, Leon and I stopped by to see her." Keisha paused, frowning. "No, that was 4 days ago. We were discussing business." "What business?" Leon interrupted before Keisha could answer. "I suggested expanding the restaurant brand, creating a line of sauces based on Mrs. Robinson's recipes. She wasn't thrilled with the idea. Did you visit the restaurant often, Mr. Jackson?" "Not particularly," Leon shrugged. "Imani and we had different views on many things." Baker nodded, noting the tension in the man's voice. "Where were you both last night between 8 and midnight?" Keisha blinked, as if trying to remember. "I was working late, preparing for a trial next week. I got home around 11. And you, Mr. Jackson, at the studio, working on a new track for a client. Can anyone confirm that?" Leon crossed his arms over his chest. "The sound engineer was with me until 9. Then I was alone." Baker wrote down the information, making a mental note to check both alibis. "One more question. Did anyone know that Mrs. Robinson would be alone at the restaurant so late?" Keisha and Leon exchanged glances. "She often stayed late," Keisha said, "especially when she was experimenting with new recipes." After a few more questions, the detective let the couple go, promising to keep them informed of the investigation. Watching them leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this story didn't add up. The next day, Baker visited the office of Dr. Zora Hampton, whose name he found in Imani's phone. According to the call log, they had spoken several times in recent weeks. "Detective Baker," Dr. Hampton greeted him in her office. She was a slender woman with attentive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "How can I help you?" "I'm investigating the murder of Imani Robinson." "Were you her doctor?" Dr. Hampton tensed. "Yes, but I can't discuss the details of her treatment without a court order." Doctor-patient confidentiality. "I understand," Baker nodded. "But I'm trying to piece together the last few weeks of her life. You're listed as a frequent contact on her phone." Zora Hampton took off her glasses and rubbed her nose. "Detective, there are some things I really can't discuss. However," she paused as if making a decision, "I can say that I was concerned about some suspicions Ms. Robinson expressed shortly before her death." "What suspicions?" "She believed that someone was deliberately trying to harm her. Deliberately." Baker leaned forward. "Did she name anyone?" "No, but she was very upset. I advised her to go to the police if she had any specific suspicions." "Dr. Hampton," Baker looked her straight in the eye. "If there's anything else that might help the investigation, I'd like to know. This is a murder case." Zora hesitated, clearly struggling with her professional ethics. "All right," she finally said. Imani was recently diagnosed with HIV. She was convinced that the infection was intentional, as recent tests had been negative and she had not engaged in risky behavior. This was unexpected information. Baker wrote it down, sensing that the case was becoming even more complicated. "Thank you, doctor. If you remember anything else, please contact me." Leaving the clinic, the detective called the lab. "I need the results of Imani Robinson's blood test as soon as possible, and check if there were any substances in the wine glass at the crime scene." At the same time, Keisha Jackson was sitting in her home office, sorting through her mother's papers that she had brought home from the restaurant. Among the bills and contracts, she found a sealed envelope with her name written in Imani's familiar handwriting. With her heart pounding, Keisha opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Keisha, if you're reading this letter, something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong, but I need to tell you something important. I was recently diagnosed with HIV. It was a shock, especially considering that my last test was negative just 6 months ago. After much thought, I've come to a terrible suspicion. I was infected on purpose, and I believe Leon did it." Keisha felt the world around her sway. She could barely breathe as she read on. Imani described her suspicions in detail, mentioning a meeting with Leon when he came to the restaurant alone, and her husband's strange behavior since then. The letter ended with the words, "I'm going to talk to him tonight to find out the truth. If anything happens to me, please contact Dr. Hampton and the detective. And be careful. I love you more than anything in the world, Mom." Keisha's hands trembled as she put the letter down. This was madness. Leon couldn't have been involved in her mother's death. He couldn't be HIV positive. He was her husband, the man she shared her bed and her life with. But somewhere deep inside, in that part of herself that Keisha tried to ignore, a seed of doubt began to grow. Leon had always been secretive about his past. He always avoided talking about Missouri, about his life before Atlanta, and his relationship with Imani had always been tense. Keisha remembered a strange phone call a couple of months ago, a woman asking for Leon, calling him by a different name. He had explained it away as a mistake, but now she stood up, clutching the letter tightly. She needed answers, and she knew where to find them. An hour later, Keisha was sitting in Dr. Hampton's office. The doctor confirmed Imani's diagnosis and her suspicions. "Your mother was convinced that the infection was intentional," Zora said. She was going to gather evidence. "I need to get tested," Keisha said hoarsely, right away. While Keisha was having her blood tested, Detective Baker received the results from the lab. Imani's blood did indeed test positive for HIV, but the analysis of the wine from the glass proved more interesting. Traces of a powerful sedative were found in it. "This wasn't a robbery," Baker told his partner. "Someone deliberately poisoned her wine and waited for her to lose consciousness. Or they tried to put her to sleep and something went wrong," his partner suggested. "Either way, it was planned," Baker said, looking over the report again. "And there's something else interesting. There are traces of lipstick on the glass. We need to find out if it belonged to Imani." The detective decided to check Leon Jackson's past. He sent a request to his colleagues in Missouri, asking for information about the man. Something told him that Keisha's husband knew more than he was saying. On the third day of the investigation, Baker got his first breakthrough. A reply came from Missouri. Leon Jackson, under the name David Raines, was a suspect in a fraud and extortion case in St. Louis. Several women had accused him of swindling large sums of money under the pretext of investing in a non-existent music business. There wasn't enough evidence to press charges, but he had suddenly disappeared from the city 3 years ago. Just before showing up in Atlanta, Baker was in his office studying this information when there was a knock at the door. Standing on the threshold was a distraught Keisha Jackson. "Detective, I need to talk to you," she said, clutching her mother's letter in her hand. "I think I know who killed my mother." Meanwhile, Leon Jackson paced nervously around his recording studio. Something was wrong. Keisha hadn't answered his calls since morning. She had been acting strangely after going to the detective's office, asking questions about his past and about Missouri. He checked his phone. Still nothing from his wife. But there was a message from an unknown number. "I know what you did, and soon everyone will know." Leon cursed. His plan was starting to fall apart. He had to get rid of Imani. The old woman knew too much. She was too close to the truth. But now he had new problems. He opened the safe in the wall of the studio and took out a passport in the name of Michael Turner. He had to prepare for a quick getaway in case things got too hot. He had the money. He had been transferring funds from his joint accounts with Keisha to offshore accounts for months. The sound of the studio door opening made him jump. Leon quickly hid the passport and closed the safe. "Who's there?" he shouted, stepping out of his office into the main studio. In the dim light, he saw a familiar silhouette. "Keisha? Where the hell have you been? I've been calling you all day." She stood motionless, her face hidden in shadow. "I know the truth, Leon," she said quietly. "Or should I call you David? Or maybe Michael?" Leon felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? Are you drunk?" "I found my mother's letter." Keisha took a step forward and he saw her face, swollen from crying but determined. "She wrote to me before she died. She told me what she suspected, that you gave her HIV. Leon laughed, trying to sound surprised. "That's ridiculous. Your mother always hated me, and now you believe some crazy accusation?" "I got tested, Leon." Keisha's voice was frighteningly calm. "It's positive. I have HIV, and I never cheated on you." Leon froze, frantically trying to think of a way out of this situation. "Keisha, listen." "No, you listen to me." She took another step toward him. "Detective Baker showed me your file from Missouri, all your previous scams, the women you cheated, but murder. That's a new level even for you." Leon realized that denying it was pointless. He changed tactics. "You don't understand. It was self-defense. Imani threatened me. She was going to destroy everything. Our marriage, our life." "Our life?" Keisha asked bitterly. "What life, Leon? The one where you infected me and my mother with a deadly disease? Where you killed the only person who ever loved me unconditionally?" She took a gun out of her purse and Leon backed away. Hey, let's calm down." He raised his hands. "We can talk about this. I love you, Keisha. Everything I did was for us." "For us?" She shook her head, holding the gun with unexpected confidence. "You have no idea what us means, Leon. You only know yourself. Think about what you're doing." Leon moved slowly toward the door. "You're a lawyer. You have a brilliant career. Do you really want to ruin everything?" For a moment, Keisha hesitated, and Leon saw his chance. He lunged forward, trying to knock the gun out of her hands. A shot rang out. Leon froze, staring in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest. He looked down, then back up at his wife. "You can't," he croaked, before collapsing to the floor. Keisha stared at him expressionlessly. Then she slowly wiped the gun with a napkin and placed it next to her husband's body. She wiped the lipstick from her lips and applied new lipstick from a special tube, a gift from a grateful client. She took one last look at the man she had once loved, then stepped out into the night, quietly closing the studio door behind her. At 11:15 p.m., the police received an anonymous call reporting shots fired at a recording studio on the outskirts of Atlanta. Detective Andre Baker arrived at the scene 20 minutes later. Leon Jackson's body lay in a pool of blood in the middle of the studio, with a gunshot wound to the chest. Next to him lay a gun, the same one the detective had seen registered to Keisha Jackson when he had checked her through the database earlier that day. Baker examined the crime scene and frowned when he noticed something strange on the computer keyboard next to the body. Leaning closer, he saw a faint lipstick mark on the spacebar, the same mark as the one on the glass at Imani Robinson's restaurant. Detective Andre Baker sat in his office, surrounded by photos from 2 crime scenes. On the left were photos from the Soul of the South restaurant where Imani Robinson was killed. On the right were images from the recording studio where Leon Jackson's body had been found. 2 deaths, 5 days apart, connected by invisible threads that he was methodically unraveling. Baker rubbed his tired eyes. A week had passed since Leon's murder, and everything pointed to Keisha Jackson. The gun registered in her name, the anonymous call from a woman's voice, the motive for revenge. The case seemed almost closed, but his instincts told him to dig deeper. There was a knock at the door. Standing on the threshold was a lab technician from the crime lab. "Detective, I have the results you requested," he said, handing him a folder. "Analysis of the lipstick traces from both crime scenes." Baker eagerly grabbed the documents. "What does it say?" "It's definitely the same formula," the lab technician pointed to the chemical formulas in the report. "A rare lipstick with mineral pigments from South Africa. Not mass-produced, but a limited edition released for high-end boutiques. Can you trace who bought it?" "Already did. It was sold in only 3 places in Atlanta. I have a list of customers who paid by credit card." He pointed to the last page of the report. "And yes, Keisha Jackson's name is there. She bought 1 unit of this lipstick about 2 months ago." Baker nodded, feeling another piece of the puzzle fall into place. "Thanks. That could be a key clue." When the lab technician left, the detective returned to the case of Leon from Missouri. His colleagues in St. Louis had sent more detailed information. Under the name David Raines, Jackson had been running the same scheme with several women. First, charm and a whirlwind romance. Then marriage, followed by an offer to invest in his music business. All of his victims were left with empty bank accounts when he disappeared. But there was something else that wasn't in the previous report. One of the women, Lorraine Wilkins, claimed that Raines had infected her with HIV. The case never went to trial. There wasn't enough evidence for criminal prosecution. However, the victim did test HIV positive after her relationship with him. Baker sighed heavily. Leon Jackson was a predator who used the same scenario with different victims. And he had added an even more vicious method to his arsenal, deliberately infecting people with a dangerous disease. The phone on the desk rang. It was Dr. Zora Hampton. "Detective Baker, I have some information that may be important to your investigation. Could we meet?" An hour later, Baker was sitting in the doctor's office. Dr. Hampton looked troubled. "I've thought long and hard about the ethical implications of this," she began, "but given the circumstances, I believe you should know. This concerns patients Imani Robinson and Leon Jackson." Baker leaned forward. "I'm listening. As you know, Imani was diagnosed with HIV shortly before her death. She was convinced that the infection was intentional. After her murder, I checked Leon Jackson's medical records, as he was also my patient. And what did you find? Leon had been HIV positive for over 3 years. He was on antiretroviral therapy, which effectively suppressed the virus, making transmission highly unlikely. But the important thing is that he knew his status the entire time." Baker frowned. "So he could have deliberately infected Imani. From a medical standpoint, if he was adhering to his medication regimen, transmission would have been unlikely through casual contact. He would have had to take additional measures to deliberately infect her." Dr. Hampton paused. "And there's something else. Keisha Jackson was also my patient. She was also diagnosed with HIV, but tests show that she was infected at least 2 years ago." "That's long before her mother was infected," Baker said thoughtfully. "Exactly. And considering that Leon and Keisha had been married for over 2 years, Leon probably infected her early in their relationship," Baker finished. "And Keisha knew about it?" "I can't say for sure. She never discussed her status directly, but I think she knew. She was too medically literate to not notice the symptoms and ignore the need for testing. Baker made a note in his notebook. There's something else that's strange, Dr. Hampton continued. The day before she died, Imani made an appointment to meet Leon at a restaurant. She told me she was going to get him to confess. She had a voice recorder, which was later found damaged at the crime scene. A voice recorder, Baker recalled the crime scene report. Yes, the technicians noted that there was a crushed voice recorder in the victim's pocket. The memory card is damaged, and the data cannot be recovered. Imani was determined to find the truth. She suspected not only deliberate infection, but also, and what? Dr. Hampton hesitated. She said she had discovered something shocking about her daughter and Leon, something that completely changed her perception of their relationship, but she didn't specify what. After leaving the clinic, Baker headed straight to Keisha Jackson's home. Since her husband's death, she had hardly left the house, citing severe stress. It seemed natural for someone who had lost both her mother and her husband in the space of a week. But now the detective saw the situation in a different light. Keisha met him at the door in her house clothes, without makeup. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were dry and strangely calm. "Detective Baker," she said, letting him into the spacious living room. "Any news on the case?" "Yes, Ms. Jackson. We've made some progress in the investigation." Baker decided to get straight to the point. "I just met with Dr. Hampton. She told me about your husband's HIV status and yours." Keisha froze, then slowly sank down onto the sofa. "I figured you'd find out sooner or later. How long have you known about your diagnosis?" She looked away. "Almost 2 years. I found out by accident when I was getting routine tests done for insurance. And you knew right away that Leon was the source?" "Not right away," Keisha replied quietly. "At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I started to suspect, but Leon denied everything. He said I must have gotten it from a previous partner. I believed him." She smiled bitterly. "I wanted to believe him." "But then you found out the truth?" "Yes. About a year ago I found his medication. He had always been secretive about his health, and now I understood why. By that time we were married, had joined accounts, a life together, and I still loved him, despite everything." Baker watched her with professional interest. "And your mother? When did she find out?" Keisha's face hardened. "A few weeks ago. She came to me in tears, showed me the test results, HIV positive. She asked if I knew anything about it. I lied to her, told her I had no idea how it could have happened." "Why didn't you tell her the truth?" "Because the truth was too horrible." Keisha stood up and walked over to the window. "My mother and my husband. They were having an affair." Baker couldn't hide his surprise. "An affair? But you said they didn't get along." "They didn't, in public. But a few months ago I started noticing things. Leon would suddenly ask me to come and see my mom. Their quiet conversations would stop when I entered the room. And then I saw the messages on his phone." She turned to the detective. They were seeing each other in secret. My husband and my mother, the man I loved, and the woman who was supposed to protect me. Now imagine how I felt when I found out he had infected her with HIV. The same disease he gave me. And you decided to take revenge," Baker said quietly. Keisha stared at him for a long minute. "Do you want a confession, detective?" "Okay. Yes, I killed them both. First my mother for her betrayal, then Leon for his deception. They destroyed my life, my faith in people, my future. They deserved what they got." "Tell me how it happened." Keisha returned to the couch, suddenly looking very tired. "That evening I went to the restaurant. I knew my mother would be alone. She thought I was coming to talk about my divorce from Leon. I brought wine, the kind she liked. We talked, and I asked her directly about her affair with Leon." Keisha paused, remembering. She didn't deny it. She said she loved him, that they planned to be together, that she was sorry for my pain, but not for her feelings. Her voice grew harder, and then she said she knew Leon had given her HIV, and that she was going to go to the police and accuse him of intentional infection. What happened then? I lost control. I grabbed a frying pan from the stove and... She fell silent. It all happened so fast. She fell, and there was so much blood. I panicked and tried to stage a robbery, but I forgot about the glass of wine I had been drinking. And Leon? Baker asked. After my mother died, I couldn't sleep or eat. All I could think about was how he had destroyed my family, how he had used me, how he had used my mother. I took my gun and went to his studio. When I told him I knew everything, he didn't even try to deny it. He just smiled and said I couldn't prove anything, that it would be my word against his, and then I shot him. Baker silently wrote down her statement. Then he looked up. Lipstick? Traces on the keyboard in Leon's studio? Was it the same lipstick as on the glass at the restaurant? Yes, Keisha nodded. I got it as a gift from a client after winning a case. It's very expensive, rare. I put it on before going to Leon's. I think I left a mark when I leaned over his desk to check if he was dead. The detective put the last period in his notebook. Keisha Jackson, you are under arrest for the murder of Imani Robinson and Leon Jackson. She didn't resist when he handcuffed her and read her rights. Keisha's face remained calm, almost peaceful, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from her shoulders. 3 months later, the trial took place. Considering the mitigating circumstances, intentional HIV infection, emotional trauma from double betrayal, the jury recommended leniency. Keisha was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. After the sentence was handed down, Detective Baker visited her in the prison visiting room. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Keisha looked pale but calm. "Better than you'd expect. Therapy is helping, and the antiretroviral drugs, too." "Do you regret your confession?" She paused. "No, I'm tired of living a lie. All those years with Leon were one big lie. Now at least I can be honest with myself." Baker nodded, then took an envelope out of his pocket. "I thought you might be interested to know. We found Leon's bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. There's almost $2 million in them, money stolen from his previous victims. Since you are his legal widow, after the victims have been compensated, a significant portion of these funds will be transferred to a managed trust fund." Keisha smiled bitterly. "Money. Always money. You know, he never really loved me or Mom. He only loved what we could give him. My legal status, my mother's restaurant, our trust. And yet," Baker said softly, "they both loved you, each in his own way." "Maybe." Keisha turned away, hiding her suddenly glistening eyes. "But sometimes love isn't enough, Detective. Sometimes the truth is more important." Baker stood up, ready to leave. "What are you going to do at the restaurant?" he asked. "The Soul of the South was an important part of your neighborhood." "I've put it in trust with a charitable foundation," Keisha replied. "They'll keep the name and traditions, and the profits will go to support women who have suffered domestic violence and people living with HIV. I think my mom would have liked that." The detective nodded. "I'm sure she would have." As he was at the door, Keisha called after him. "Detective Baker, thank you." "For what?" "For finding the truth. We were all trapped in a web of lies for too long. Leon lied to us. I lied to my mom. My mom lied to me. And in the end, we all paid a terrible price." Baker looked at her thoughtfully. "You know what I've discovered over all these years of investigating? The truth always comes out, no matter how deep it's buried, no matter how many lies are piled on top of it. In the end, it finds its way to the light." He left the room, leaving Keisha alone with her thoughts, and the burden of the truth she had finally been able to accept. In her prison cell that night, Keisha Jackson took out the photograph, the only one she had been allowed to keep. In the picture, She and Imani were smiling on a sunny day many years ago, long before Leon came into their lives, before the betrayal, before the illness, before the murders. "I'm sorry, Mom," Keisha whispered, running her finger over the woman's face in the photo. "I loved you. Always." She tucked the photo under her pillow and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without nightmares.